Greetings, YouTube. It's Belton here. It may be the holiday season, but beware. Gay times lay not ahead for those crafters who got accustomed to what was available in this past league. I'm sorry to have to be the bearer of bad news, but giving it to you guys straight, homo is no mo. But fret not, fellow exiles, for while homos have been banned from Ray class by GGG for making you finish too fast and too easily, I've got your back. Today, I'm going to walk you guys through the decision to remove both the Homogenized Coronation and Homogenized Exalted Omens, why I believe the removal of one of these is actually a big mistake, and how to navigate crafting your items now that they are gone. I'm going to give you guys a basic rubric in which to achieve at a bare minimum 4 tier 1 items on any base of your choosing every single time without risk of failure. I will also provide some feedback on the changes and where I think improvements can be made or where I think the real problems lie. I know I've not posted a video in some time, something I could address in a future video, but for now, I'm sure many of you have had this question on your mind and I wanted to help you guys get on the right path before Friday's league start. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, liking the video, leaving a comment, and turning on notifications to stay up to date with future videos and guides. I've written several of them already to release prior to the league start. Lastly, before we begin, I spend hours writing incredibly detailed and wordy guides for the majority of these videos. Often these are not included, or I amalgamate a series of Google Docs, spreadsheets, and notepad notes I made while I'm playing into a single narrative for the video. I will now be making all of this extra content, information, and insight available to YouTube channel members of any tier going forward. I've already posted today's 6,000 word, 16 page script there ahead of time, which has some bonus stuff included. The membership tiers begin at just a couple dollars a month for those interested. Thank you guys very much for the support. Here's what that would look like. You can see here, these are various different things that I've written for the game. And if we go into the documents here, you can see I have literally hundreds of them. Many of these are proprietary data sets that do not exist elsewhere, or just very large sort of macro aggregates of various functions within the game. So hopefully there's some value for there. And those of you that are interested, I hope you guys enjoy. Anyways, let's begin. So homogenized have been removed from the game. How are we going to navigate this change? First of all, I want to start with what I think should be obvious and a pretty big deal. I do not think homogenized coronations do need to be removed, and I think that this decision should actually be reversed. Item rarity states cannot be reversed in PoE 2, so having a single-use currency item with no other omens that can be paired with it has a finite capacity to draw from mod tags by virtue of there only being 2 maximum affixes on a magic item, and by magic items not being able to be cheesed with temporary desecrated mods or essences, since they have to be used on rare items, gives the omen a very limited ceiling and use case relative to the proportionate strength of something like the homogenized Exalt. As it currently stands, the coronation is one of the only reasons to pay any mind to magic items whatsoever, outside of repeated exceptional transmuting, which you would only do once, and then augmenting and annul spamming with the perfects, which in of itself is limited by the cost of annulments and is largely undertaken to set up either a good coronation target or some other use cases would be stacking potential targets for fractured mods or to increase the fracture probability, or targeting low-weight, high-value modifiers such as Merciless by taking advantage of the fact that the perfect transmute and augment have a minimum item level of 70, while the other exceptional currencies are 50 for the perfects. Since a coronation can only be used at once at most per item, and since there are no other omens that can be used with regals, and since the best case outcome of a regal is making a 3T1 rare, there is no reason to remove them, and doing so will actively lower the general crafting understanding, as tags will no longer have any point of consideration in the remaining crafting currencies. High agency, thought-provoking, and customizable currency items are always good ideas to keep around, as they remove the slot machine perceptions from crafting, and they encourage, foster, and develop player investment in knowledge. The balancing act that needs to be considered with these crafting materials, items, or processes is that you do not want to be entirely guaranteed to make a 100% perfect, variance-devoid item that once made has no possible or even practical avenue for improvement, as this, while rewarding and exciting in the short term, invariably causes player drop-off or stagnation, since the chase or carrot on the stick element of character optimization becomes superfluous. With the above in mind, I think that there's a very clear divide between a homogenized coronation and a homogenized exalt. And removing both as if they are on equal footing is a mistake that hurts all parties. Using the above framework, we can develop a short series of questions to assess the strength or kind of relative value of a currency item with respect to where it stands from a balanced perspective. Now, these are just some questions that came to my mind immediately, but I think it does provide a good rubric for assessing this. So the first question would be, can it be used to deterministically guarantee an outcome? Number 2, can it be used repeatedly? Number 3, can it be paired with other omens or crafting currencies to magnify or multiply its effectiveness? Number 4, does it require any strategic planning to be used effectively? Number 5, does its use have any downside associated with it or a potential risk? Number 6, can it provide an outcome that is otherwise unobtainable? What I mean by that is an exclusive modifier. So, for example, there are desecrated mods that are only available for desecration, or there are essences that have affixes that are outside of just the basic pool of general affixes. Number 7, does its rarity or subsequent price match, fall short of, or exceed its relative or marginal value add? And number 8, is its use effectively mandatory in the process of crafting an item? Or if you were to not use it, would it be possible to achieve the desired end state? So using those 8 questions that we just laid out there, if we were to compare them, so number 1, can it be used to deterministically guarantee an outcome? With the homogenized coronations, sometimes yes, but most of the time no. With the homogenized exalt, yes. Can it be used repeatedly? Coronation, no. Exalt, yes. Can it be paired with other omens or crafting currencies to magnify or multiply its effectiveness? Homogenized coronation, no. Exalt, yes. Does it require any strategic planning to be used effectively? Coronation, yes. Homogenized exalt, yes. Does its use have any downside associated with it or potential risk? With the coronation, yes. And that is because item rarity can only be changed once in PoE 2. So once it's changed from magic to rare, that cannot be reversed. But with an exalt, there is no downside since it's used on a rare item, and you can always remove modifiers using the other omens. Can it provide an outcome that is otherwise unobtainable? In both cases, no. Does its rarity or subsequent price match, fall short of, or exceed its relative or marginal value add? And for a coronation, I would say it is appropriately priced relative to its value add, and the relationship as well between a perfect regal, which is most commonly paired with it, and a coronation is about 1-to-1. They're relatively similarly priced. A homogenized exalt, on the other hand, is incredibly cheap for the value that it adds. As well, if you look at the proportionate relationship, a perfect exalt is a presumptive pairing, which prior to the removal announcement that they were getting rid of these, was approximately 50 times the cost of the homogenized. Now, number 8. Is its use effectively mandatory in the process of crafting an item? And if you were to not use it, would it be still possible to achieve the desired end state? And with a coronation, it's absolutely not mandatory. And with exalt, it effectively is. In many cases, it would be next to impossible to hit a 5th or 6th modifier without spending hundreds or thousands of divines to hit the same outcome vis-a-vis using omens of whittling or erasures and sinestral and dextral erasures, or the combination of the two. But that also bears the risk of potentially bricking the item due to rolling a higher item level modifier than the pre-existent desired 4th or 5th mod. And it's going to vary on a case-by-case basis, but when you contextualize through the lens of a 6th modifier on a 5T1 item, the average alternative crafting cost is often hundreds or thousands of times higher to obtain the same result. And for the majority of cases, bear risk breaking that item, and they will require either a YOLO annul or restarting either of the prefixes or suffixes. So I think the above questions are quickly put together and mostly just a thought exercise. And by no means do they represent the totality of considerations that one could filter this comparative analysis through. Furthermore, there's obviously countless possible modifiers, base type, and mod tier considerations that make a universally applicable 1-to-1 comparison possible. However, I do believe the spirit of what I'm trying to convey is well served by the above. In short, not all homos are the same. Excuse me for a sec. Now that I've advocated for the coronation, that brings us to the far more significant and impactful of the two omens, the one whose removal I don't have any significant pushback against, and that is the homogenizing exaltation. Now, there are significant force multipliers and conditional considerations that allow for the homogenized exalt to be the way that it is, that extend beyond the omen's strength in of itself. The primary culprits are these being that there's a synergistic use with greater exaltation omens, which allow you to use 2 additional modifiers, or the sinestral or dextral exaltations, which allow you to force prefixes or suffixes irrespective of the current amount of modifiers on the items, and obviously the greater and perfect exalted orbs, which will restrict the item level options. You also have desecrated modifiers being able to temporarily either provide a tag to force an outcome or being able to block an undesired modifier with the same tag, only to then be removed without risk through the use of an omen of light. Or you could use essences to easily guarantee tags with the capacity to target either prefixes or suffixes by using sinestral or dextral crystallizations in both their capacity to remove a mod and add a mod, and most importantly is the fact that they are able to be used on rare items, meaning that they can be used ad infinitum, or they can be used indefinitely. The interdependent and synergistic nature of crafting currencies means that the inclusion of new ones always poses the same risk. That being that the totality becomes well in excess of the sum of its parts. I think that if you consider the previous paragraph, this is readily apparent. I can think of multiple ways to tackle the issue that would not have necessitated the removal of the homogenized exalted omen, but each one of them would have their own series of downstream consequences if the assumption is that we had to find a solution to the problem of crafting determinism. In that respect, I cannot argue with the reasoning behind its removal, only to say that the problems it provided are not specific to it itself, but are more systemic in the sense that PoE 2 crafting is not currently implemented in any kind of way that bears any mutual exclusivities or opportunity costs factored in. And therefore, each successive mechanic or currency item that is introduced will likely spawn a series of similar problems until you address this underlying causality. Now, for example, in PoE 1, if you fracture an item, you may never influence that item, nor can you synthesize that item. You can, however, use Eldritch currency on that item. This mutual exclusivity forces forethought, planning, and consideration of the upsides and downsides, ergo opportunity cost, before proceeding with any one of the options. Furthermore, in PoE 1, most of the crafting mechanics are broken into their own individual ecosystems, UIs, or functionality. Each one has a tremendous amount of value, and while there is some overlap, rarely do they exist within an infinitely looping chain of effectiveness. If I used a harvest bench, it does not make delve fossils better. If I use the crafting bench, it does not make beast crafting easier. In PoE 2, everything exists in the same ecosystem, and there is no opportunity cost. If I fracture a modifier, I am not prevented from desecrating that item. I'm not prevented from using omens or exceptional currency or vol orbs or essences or any of the systems currently in place. The one exception to this is being divine orbs in their primary function or with sanctification with respect to the capacity to alter fractures. Therefore, it is almost always the most rational first thing to do on any item you craft, that being fracturing. Find the rarest modifier or the most strategically difficult modifier to otherwise obtain, fracture it, and proceed. The abundant availability of fracturing orbs makes this effectively zero consideration activity and the basis of almost all crafts. Next, I can remove all modifiers but one, and then simply spam chaos orbs until I get whatever second modifier I want, of whatever tier, with zero cost or risk of losing the fractured mod. Typically, this will be paired with the fractured mod's either prefix or suffix status, as prefixes and suffixes are effectively treated as separate items from a crafting determinism standpoint, and thus getting 2 tier 1 modifiers of a desired prefix or suffix combination is often the most sensible act, and reaching that state requires absolutely zero strategy outside choosing the modifiers and slot machining chaos orbs until your desired outcome is eventually reached. Next, I can then desecrate the third and final prefix using a preserved or ancient item, combining that with an omen of sinestral or dextral necromancy to ensure its prefix or suffix status. I could potentially pair it with an Aminamu, Kurgle, or Ulamon desecration tag to all but guarantee the outcome, and then I can pair that with an omen of abyssal echoes to not only get 3 potential options, but 6, including targeted exclusive modifiers, naturally occurring ones, and also which can be potentially item level boosted by using an ancient currency item. This creates a very high success rate environment for obtaining your third prefix or suffix, which, as mentioned earlier, is effectively finishing an item in of itself, since sinestral annulments, dextral annulments, sinestral erasures, dextral erasures, sinestral and dextral crystallizations, sinestral and dextral exaltations, and their respective compatibilities with greater imperfect exalted orbs, chaos orbs, essences, and annuls mean that I can, at any point, remove, rerule, or RNG wheel a prefix or suffix without any risk whatsoever to its oppositely pooled counterpart. Meaning, if I'm rolling a prefix and I've got 3 suffixes, I can always ensure that those 3 suffixes will be safe, and vice versa. Therefore, obtaining 3T1 prefixes or 3T1 suffixes is kind of like in the old game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, when contestants would be guaranteed to win a minimum prize pool no matter what once they cross a certain threshold. So too do prefixes and suffixes functionally operate in PoE2 crafting. That brings us back to desecrating our third modifier. Not only are we able to obtain item level restricted prefix suffix targets, see 6 possible options, obtain exclusive modifiers, and to do so with 0 risk, we are also able to, at any stage of the item's progression, remove that modifier with an Omen of Light and an annul. This means that we can operationally use the desecrated modifier like the crafting multi-tool. Eventually, it can be our desired mod, but on the way, it can be used to block item tags, to block modifiers, to feed item tags, to provide chaos targets to remove, to provide prefixes, to remove suffixes, to provide targets for essences, to prop item levels for whittling targeting, etc. There is no downside. There is no risk. And it can be done as your first mod or your last mod or anything in between. This functionality is far more problematic long-term than that posed by a homogenized Exalted Omen, not necessarily because of what the desecrated modifier itself provides, but because of its capacity to work in conjunction with any of or all of the methods I just mentioned. Now, you could also, even for your third prefix, while I focus on desecration there, you could also effectively just use an essence as long as the essence had a tier 1 modifier available. So let's say you fractured a prefix, you chaos your second prefix, both are tier 1. You could then just put a exalt suffix and then get an essence with a dextral crystallization, which would remove a suffix. And as long as that essence was a prefix, boom, you've got your 3 prefixes. But let's get back to the hypothetical item. So we fracture our first and our rarest mod. We chaos spam our second mod to pair with the prefix suffix status of mod 1. We have desecrated our third modifier and our third prefix or suffix. Now we have a perfect 3 tier 1 item that is our version of the $1,000 Who Wants to Be a Millionaire question, or I think it was $32,000 was the next threshold. But no matter what we do next, the item can be brought back to this state. It's worth noting, guys, that thus far, outside of deciding which 3 prefixes or suffixes we want, there is absolutely no strategic, zero strategic input or real agency exercise on the part of the player. We've hit a 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 on our fracture. If you put a desecrated mod, those can't be hit by a fracturing orb. So if you have 3 regular mods and 1 desecrated mod, the mod that you're going after will be a 1 in 3 versus a 1 in 4. And then we spammed our chaos, and then we desecrated and Omen of Light / annul spammed our way into a 50% of a mirror item. So let's proceed. And assuming you guys have read the text of what these things are on the screen now, I'll put this up on the top here just to give you a basic kind of rubric for what I'm saying. As I imagine when I'm just spewing the steps off verbally, it might be hard to follow along. That's not the totality of what you do, but just, again, like a little step-by-step there. So let's proceed. Modifier 4 will, in most cases, be prefix or suffix number 1. We have the capacity to exalt and infinitely spam dextral or sinestral erasures, or sinestral erasures, dextral erasures plus chaos, greater perfect chaos, to hit whatever modifier is wanted here without the chance for failure. This would be expensive and is largely impractical. Excuse me again for a sec. This becomes less so the case, however, when we consider that since it is our first prefix or suffix, we have 3 desired modifiers that are remaining, right? Since we're obviously at the end final item, we want to have three mods in mind. So that first one, you don't only have one option to hit, you have three. This improves the odds, obviously, significantly. Furthermore, we can also compare the cost of doing so with erasures to the cost of doing so with Exalt plus Dextral or Sinestral Annul, or we could even greater Exalt plus Perfect Exalt, two random suffixes or prefixes of a minimum item level, while blocking an undesired suffix or prefix first with our Flex modifier, the Desecration, which we can always put back into its intended final state later anyways. And if any of those options are undesirable, you can always use an Omen of Whittling and progressively raise the item level of the fourth modifier until it hits one of the three you want. If the fourth modifier ever exceeds the item level of mods 1 to 3, no worries, you can just swap to a Dextral or Sinestral erasure to forcibly remove it until it's lower again. Or if it's the fifth modifier, you can combine both of them, that being an erasure and a whittling, to reroll the lowest item level modifier between the two suffixes or prefixes you are currently working on. That begs the question, what if we make modifier number 4 and prefix number 1 or suffix number 1 the highest item level of the three desired modifiers that we want on that half of the item? And then we also tailor the item level of our base to ensure that there are no superfluous modifiers above those that we predetermine to be desired, forcing away the option of those pesky brick affixes. Heck, it doesn't even need to apply to the whole item, just half. Since our first three modifiers are 100% guaranteed, 100% of the time, with zero risk, maybe we can factor this reality into our decision-making process, and we could tailor our Fractured mod, and thus the subsequent Chaos mod number 2 and Desecrate mod number 3 around this fact. Genius! So, we now have our Fractured mod, we now have our Chaos mod, and we now have our Desecrated mod. We have 3 tier 1 prefixes or suffixes. We have our highest item level prefix or suffix number 1, which is also our modifier number 4. There we go. Now we're at 4 tier 1 with 2 mods to go. Since our first prefix or suffix, mod number 4, is the highest item level of our desired prefixes or suffixes, that would imply that modifier number 5 would be equal or lower. If the latter, whittling and an occasional whittling plus erasure will 100% guarantee your fifth modifier. If the former, there's a strong chance that it is a desired modifier in and of itself. Item level 82 is always required for tier 1 resistances or elemental rolls, for example. Elemental resistance rolls, for example. And item level 82 is always the highest item level requirement for any affix on any item. If modifier number 4 and suffix number 1 in that case was tier 1 fire res, there is a high probability that getting the only item level adjacent modifiers in that same prefix or suffix pairing would be wanted, since the only options would be tier 1 lightning or tier 1 cold res. This, as a side note, is the case on any item where 3 tier 1 resistances are wanted. It is a matter of mathematical certainty and a high degree of probability or rate of acquisition that you will hit 41 to 45 fire, cold, and lightning resistance by simply spamming whittlings or whittlings and erasures on any item that desires tri-res. You could literally do so blindfolded, and that would be the case. This applies to helmets, boots, body armors, gloves, rings, and belts. Amulets have tier 1 to all attributes as well that are at item level 82, but that's also an incredibly good mod. This is something the marketplace in PoE 2 greatly overvalues. All elemental resistant modifiers are 1,000 weights and the highest possible item level. They are most heavily weighted affixes on any item where they appear and the most inevitable. With that in mind, on any item where tri-res is sought, always do your prefixes first. As a final note on this little brief detour here, Chaos Resistance is item level 81 and is a 250 weight, which is often one of the rarest, if not the rarest, modifier on items where it appears, in terms of the suffixes, and is also often contested from an item level perspective with additional modifiers of a higher weighting. A 3 T1 Chaos Res, plus with 2 elemental tier 1 resistances, as an item is an order of magnitude more difficult to obtain than an otherwise identical 3 tier 1 triple elemental resistance item. The market, in particular early on, rarely reflects this. This is doubly so the case in the first week or so, since a much higher premium is put on capping elemental resistances as compared to chaos resistance. The demand curve for that hits a tipping point very quickly, though, and thus investing into 3 T1 suffixes with chaos res items early on is a very sound store of value if you are looking to diversify your liquidity into appreciating assets rather than holding it in raw currency, which, similar to modern monetary theory or quantitative easing, or in layman's term, money printer go brrr, is in a constant inflationary state and is thus devalued over time. Now, getting back to the original point, if it's the latter, meaning that your fifth modifier, which is prefix or suffix number 2, is of equal item level to modifier number 4 and is undesired, you can do one of multiple things. You could use a dextral or sinestral annul and an annulment orb for a 50-50 to remove it. Dextral or sinestral crystallization plus an essence modifier that you know is a lower item level than modifier number 4, again, a 50-50. Dextral or sinestral erasure plus chaos, 50-50 to remove the undesired modifier number 5. However, we still have a small chance to reroll into a modifier that is undesired and of an equal item level modifier number 4. If this is a possibility on the item at hand, and you are doing this explicitly with the aim of removing modifier number 5 to remove item level conflicts with modifier number 4, make sure you pair the erasure with a normal chaos orb and not a greater or a perfect chaos orb, because this will dramatically increase the likelihood that the resultant reroll will be a lower item level than the 4th modifier. If you haven't added a desecrated 3rd prefix or a suffix yet, and or decided to remove it temporarily to operate as a flex mod to ease the process of obtaining the secondary 3T1 counterpart. For example, you intend on the final item having a desecrated mod to be a prefix, but after chaos orbing the second tier 1 prefix, you desecrated a suffix to block that suffix from being able to roll prior to dextral exalt plus greater exalt omen plus perfect exalting the remaining 2 suffixes. Which resulted, let's say, in hitting one desired suffix and one undesired suffix, both of which are the same item level. In this case, you could use the Omen of the Light and to get rid of the desecrated mod, and then use a dextral crystallization and essence of the abyss. The Mark of the Beast that would come as a result would have a 50-50 chance of removing the undesired mod, similar to any one of the methods that I just mentioned. But it would have the additional benefit of adding a desecrated mod to either the 3rd prefix or to the 2nd suffix, depending where the Mark of Chaos is landed. You could use this desecration reveal to block an unwanted suffix prior to exalting the 3rd suffix, which would be our 2nd desired one. Do not do this and whittle spam, though, as the lowest item level suffix could be rolled into your open prefix. And as a little known and very infrequently used side note, Mark of the Chaos itself is an item level 1 modifier. So you can use that to replace modifier number 4 or prefix number 1 or suffix number 1. 2, if that happens to be a higher item level, and let's say you're just whittling to get your 4th mod, and that 4th mod ends up being a higher item level than one of your pre-existing 3 modifiers. This is practical in the case where you're using, or where sinestral or dextral erasures are significantly more expensive than whittlings are. That was the case this past league, for example. If you watch my quiver crafting video, we would get the +2 fracture, then the double crit, and then you would roll your first prefix, right? And whittlings at the time were like 2 divines, but erasures were like 7. And so if you got like tier 1 accuracy or like tier 1 flat elemental that was not lightning, that would be the highest the item level mod now. And so if you tried to just use a whittling, it would reroll one of your either crit bonus or crit chance. So in that situation, you could use the Mark of the Chaos via the Essence of the Abyss. And Mark of the Chaos is then an item level 1 mod, so then you could just whittle that away as well. Or you could desecrate it, choose one in case you get lucky, and then make sure it's a lower item level and roll that away as well. Also, as an alternative to that, you could use the Sinestral or Dextral Annul plus Annul and Exalt. That's almost always more expensive than the Erasure route, however. Once that 5th modifier is lowered to an item level that is below modifier number 4, simply return to Whittling or Whittling plus Erasure and Chaos spamming the item as needed until you hit a desired 5th modifier. In most cases, the above will be unnecessary. However, as more often than not, the highest item level prefix or suffix that we have strategically chosen and tailored our order of operations and base level around will be a monolith at that item level, meaning that modifier number 5 will almost always be guaranteed without risk of bricking or failure. Now, as a much cheaper alternative way to go about this, which is the one that's written on the screen, and I do recognize that what I just said was probably a mouthful for for some of you guys, but this way is much cheaper and easier to go about. If your item has an essence that can be used or desired for modifier number 4 or 5, some perfect essences are organic, mod adjacent. Sometimes they're exclusive mods, and sometimes they're slightly worse than the organic modifiers or the ones that roll naturally. Perfect essences provide variable item levels depending on the base and the essence type, but they're typically around item level 70, meaning that they are unlikely to be capable of sustaining whittling for very long. This is not a major concern, as it can be added following modifier number 4, which is very easy to obtain in most cases, since you have 3 possible options that are desired at that stage. Simply use its remove and add function to target the 5th modifier that you previously exalted. Or, as I alluded to earlier, you can, if you have a let's say a prefix that is an essence mod that is desired, you can fracture prefix number 1, chaos prefix number 2, add a suffix, now remove the suffix and add that essence, which is now the prefix, and then your 4th mod can, if you really wanted to, you could just desecrate, but I would recommend at least getting 1 organic modifier that you want there, and then desecrating it, and boom, you've got 5T1. In many cases, you will simply be able to exalt a 4th mod, replace that exalt with an essence mod, and have yourself a perfect 4 tier 1 item that took 10 minutes or less to make, has no failure or bricking potential, requires no strategic planning, and will be capable of completing all of the content in the game, and 95% plus of the time can be sold at a significant, often astronomical profit margin. This is without factoring in modifier number 4 and 5, without factoring modifier number 5 and 6, which, even if left entirely to chance, so for example, you do what's written above me here, you get the 4 guaranteed tier 1s, and you just decide to randomly throw 2 exalts at it, and you just go with whatever it hits. It would still leave you with a 4 tier 1 item with 2 meh mods. This is well in excess of what is needed to do any content in the game. If modifiers number 5 and 6 are even remotely relevant, the value add from a market standpoint can be multiplicative as compared to just having the 4. This is because, as illustrated through this video, getting 4 T1 mods is not only easy, it's literally guaranteed. 100% of the time, without fail, if you appropriately prepend your craft. Modifier number 5 and 6 often require the use of quote-unquote expensive omens and or various levels of layered RNG or variants, with typically that come with fail case or brick scenarios that either halt the item's progress, require a YOLO removal or reroll attempt, several of those options I mentioned earlier, or you simply restarting the prefixes or suffixes. Early on in leagues, it's almost never worthwhile to restart the prefixes or suffixes, as there is a large enough demand for mid-range items, and so it's far better to simply sell the one that you just quote-unquote bricked as a 4 tier 1 plus X mods for somebody else to use, and just try to finish try and finish, or who wants to just strip it for the 3T1 prefixes or suffixes that are on it. What is great, however, is that not only can you recoup the costs on these failed crafts, and I say failed crafts with quotes around it, allowing you to infinitely cycle them until you do hit your 5th modifier or 6th modifier, but often even the bricks will be more expensive than their cost accounting would indicate. In essence, you can not only infinitely make attempts at perfect items, or at the very least 5 tier 1 items. 6 tier 1 items are often, more often than not, best done by desecrating the 6th modifier rather than the 3rd or 4th modifier, and using omens to obtain either modifier 3 or 4. However, this kind of pot commits you to that exact item earlier on, since you'll be spending multiple divines simply to either finish the prefixes 3T1 or just to get the first suffix, and you'll possibly need to revert back to modifier 2 if the annul post brick number 3 misses. This is not a terribly big deal, since modifier number 2 is just rolled with chaos orbs, so the relative cost of replacing that mod is low, especially once you're at a point that you're using the expensive omens. This is what I mean, however, when I say that the item kind of pot commits you, since once you commit to using omens to finish either the first 3 prefixes or suffixes, or to get that 4th modifier, which will be prefix number 1 or suffix number 1, you're effectively committing yourself to making that item at a bare minimum 5T1. In my case, I would say 6T1. Since getting 2 tier 1 suffixes and then desecrating the final tier 1 suffix will often simply be a matter of whittling one prefix or suffix, essencing the second one, desecrating the third. This will be equal to or less than the cost of getting the first 3 prefixes or suffixes in most cases. So it's simply a matter of practicality to take a 6 tier 1 at that point. There is an exponential price difference between 4 tier 1 and 5 tier 1, and again between 5 tier 1 and 6 tier 1 in most cases. This was less pronounced with homogenized Exalt omens in the game, so during this last league, patch 0.3, because the homogenized Exalted omen, if I were to distill it down into just what it did most simplistically, it effectively allowed for one more guaranteed mod to like the calculus above, with no risk to be added to the sequence of events I've discussed throughout this video. So if you can currently, even with their removal, guarantee a 5T1, a 4T1, just think of it in a basic term in terms of what the homogenized exaltation did, was that you could effectively guarantee a 5T1 on any item with basically 0 risk and very little effective planning. As you know, we've gone over now how to effectively and efficiently obtain 4T1 items on just about every base in the game. And so the addition of one more guaranteed mod would make the item 5 tier 1. As you're probably aware, that is one modifier off of perfect, without a shred of variance, RNG, or difficulty. In some cases, it was even possible to get 6 tier 1, 100% of the time, without risk or variance or the potential to fail or to have reversion states. These were outliers, but due to the order of operations most crafts go through that we've discussed throughout, you can see how easy it would be to demonize that omen specifically, not only for its inherent functionality, but because it was so adaptive. You could use it for modifier number 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, often with complete assurance. You could combine it with a greater omen to get 2 modifiers. You could combine it with a sinestral or a dextral exaltation omen to force tags to prefixes or to suffixes at any point. You could pair it with essences or desecrated mods to easily manipulate tags. You could do it repeatedly. Not only that, but even in the cases where you failed, it would make the mod number 5 and number 6, for example, in the cases we talked about throughout, at the very least be tag related. It might not necessarily be T1, but it would guarantee the pool of affix options to be related to the item up until that point. This meant that even bricks still had even modifier consistency and congruency to provide enough of a value proposition to be sold of their own merit. All of this stemming from an omen that you could buy for a couple of chaos orbs. Now, was homogenized exaltation the reason why crafting perfect items became less of an achievement and more of an inevitability last patch? No, it was not. Not by itself, at least. Saying so would be an unfair categorization of the omen's strength, and I also think would be doing a disservice to the idea of involving modifier tags to the process of crafting in PoE 2, which I am strongly in favor of. As this video has covered, for the time being, I am simply of the belief that this is best done through the use of the homogenized coronation, which I repeat, should not be removed from the game. I believe the decision to do so was conflating the functionality and the power of an omen with its name. Homogenizing may precede both coronation and exalted, but as demonstrated and discussed throughout this video, they are far from the same. Frankly, they're not really even in the same ballpark. The primary issue with PoE 2 crafting scalability is not a result of any one item. The reason why there have been, and my opinion will continue to be, ongoing complaints about the state of the crafting in the game, whether that be that it's too hard, too random, too expensive, too cheap, too easy, too deterministic, not deterministic enough, or anything in between, which, as a side note, have all been complaints I've fielded hundreds of times on both YouTube comments and Twitch chat. I'm not entirely sure if these comments are made in an effort to diminish my enjoyment of the pursuit, or because people think I'm somehow responsible for designing the game's crafting systems. But either way, I can't help but laugh seeing equal and opposite complaints about the exact same system at the exact same time on a near daily basis. But the reason that exists to begin with is because there are no systemic limitations put into place to cap the exponential nature of overlapping currency or crafting items. These limitations do not need to exist in a rigid, unintuitive, or artificial way, but can be implemented more subtly through things like mutual exclusivities. For example, I gave earlier, fractured items cannot be desecrated, or desecrated items cannot have a fracture. Or it can be done by creating different crafting UIs or systems that are not interdependent. If anyone in a position of influence or concern within GGG ever gets a whiff of this video, I highly recommend leaning into the adaptation of systems that reward agency, knowledge asymmetry, forethought, and planning. They are what makes crafting fun. They are what makes crafting worth investing the time into learning. More people looked into modifier weights, tiers, affixes, crafting tags, prefixes, suffixes, desecrations, etc. in 0.3 than the previous 2 leagues combined. People did not do this because they hated having to alt-tab to look at third-party websites, but they did it because it made a difference that they looked at a third-party website. Removing crafting and modifier tags is not demystifying, cluttering, or decluttering an overly convoluted process. It is removing the primary incentive people had to convince themselves that the system you created was worth learning about, and by extension, engaging with it. People don't bother pulling up a PoE 2 DB page to look up the modifier weighting of something like +3 to projectile skills on an amulet if all they can do to bring it about is sit there and click chaos orbs until it eventually shows up. Why bother? What does that investment of time do to impact the probability of success in that situation? Nothing. Does that mean it's a pointless pursuit? Also, no. If you're aware of the fact that the suffixes on a max level item level amulet are in excess of 100,000 weighting, and that the modifier you are singularly in need of has a 100 weighting, and that the chaos orb you are using only has a 50% chance of rolling a suffix to begin with, you probably aren't going to send Belton a mean YouTube comment when you don't craft a +3 amulet and 9 divines worth of chaos like he did in the YouTube short you saw. Is that displaced anger or frustration? Certainly. But the end result is almost always the same. People just don't engage with crafting anymore. Who they blame for that is largely irrelevant. The point is that there is a disconnect between the marginal input and the outcome. If I am not improving my results by improving my action, my strategy, my thoughts, or my practices, then I am undertaking a fruitless pursuit. Do not make the mistake of thinking that people do not want to learn and do not want to improve. They do. They just need to know that doing so is met with a commiserate outcome. In summation, removing homogenized exaltation was inappropriate and it was likely necessary at this time. However, it is not a permanent solution to the underlying problem it has alleged to address. Homogenized coronations have little to do with their exalted counterparts and are of little consequence in any real sense that would merit their removal. They can also serve as a way to preserve item or modifier tags as a system within the game in a low-impact way while still familiarizing people with the system or broader crafting mechanics at large when they try to learn about them. I generally favor leaning into systems that reward strategic planning over pure variance. As a final note, pleasure is always fleeting when it feels unearned. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I know it's been a while since I posted the video. For those of you who are interested and the members that currently exist, you will find this entire 17-page script and I believe it's 6,000 words, as well as some extra little things and TLDRs and notes I put in there for you, posted to the membership page now. If you guys have any questions or suggestions or things you would like to know before the start of 0.4, I'd be incredibly happy to answer that. Just so you know, I put my money where my mouth is. I picked up 2,000 homogenized exalts, some coronations, etc. as well, just so I have those for future access. All right. I know there's a lot of numbers and stuff thrown out there today, but I hope it served you well. And thank you for anyone watching for the first time, anybody who made it to the end. God bless, guys, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.